together and welcome to our panel today. So our topic is here the digital health perspective of payers and providers. So we will discuss some partnership experiences, and I'm very proud to have three great panelists here, which I would love to do. Introduce yourself because you can do it obviously best. So we will start with Patty.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm Patty Barnett, Vice President for Health Policy at the Centene Corporation. And just a little bit about Centene, we're a multinational Fortune 50 company delivering whole person comprehensive healthcare across 50 states with a growing international presence, and are a leader in government sponsored insurance, but also serve commercial markets as well. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So the next one is Ilya, you're from Israel.
Hi, Eyal Zimlichman. I'm the Chief Medical Officer and Chief Innovation Officer at Sheba Medical Center in Israel, just outside of Tel Aviv. Sheba is the largest hospital in Israel. We have a very advanced innovation program that we've kicked off about 4 years ago called ARC. It stands for Accelerate, Redesign, and Collaborate, and working on a lot of international collaborations. And happy to tell some of the stories on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Then Rishi.
Hi, I'm Rishi Dasgupta. I'm the Chief Innovation and Technology Officer Hospital in London. We are a national and international heart and lung centre, and so have had a quite central role in this COVID crisis over the last 6 months or so. Very happy to join the panel today.
Thank you a lot for introducing yourself. So probably, Rishi, we start also with your perspective regarding digital healthcare, because you also mentioned that you are a very specialized center, also in the field of lung and heart diseases. So that would be interesting if you can share some experience, maybe also regarding to the last couple of months where we also had some intense times when it comes to healthcare. How did you adopt digital health tools in this time? How did it work? What kind of experience did you make? So maybe you can share some insights.
Sure. So, well, first, I think it's been a really interesting last 3 to 6 months. I always worried about hubris, but we started out this program with, we started out the year with quite an ambitious 18-month program about things that we wanted to do to promote remote working, remote healthcare, and help our patients reduce the number of visits they make to our hospital. Which actually stood us in quite good stead for the COVID response that we've had to make. And so you know, some 70% of what we've done is really accelerating things we had in train. But in parallel, we've gone from being a specialist, primarily elective centre to being pretty much a 7-day emergency centre, taking referrals from other hospitals across London and expanding our ITU by almost 6-fold at one point. So it's been a really big set of changes. And what I would say is it's been really important having a strong digital and technology team linked in with the clinical team within the hospital. And that was my main takeaway from this process, is much of the work that we've done preparing the way for that over the last couple of years has been really valuable. Pause there and hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So I was wondering then also if this is the kind of experience you made. So what kind of tools did you experience to be most valuable? So did you have something in place before that you can also leverage within these days, or did you adopt fully new technologies?
So in part, we had done a lot of work in advance trying to work out which tools we would use for particularly remote health, but what we found is that each of the systems that we use is much more flexible than we had planned. And actually, many of the things that when I say flexible, they're very simple things. But you know, Microsoft Teams, we launched it in February as our program, and nobody adopted it at all. And then we suddenly found that we could use it not only for team interactions amongst non-clinical staff, but clinical staff working in different areas of the hospital, not having to go from one zone to another and, you know, don and doff protective equipment, using it with patients, using it with other hospitals, and actually using it with relatives. It actually gave us a whole set of things that worked even better than we might have hoped. You know, if you're in an ITU and covered in or full PPE equipment, talking to a patient's relatives can feel quite impersonal. And in a way, the interaction through a digital medium with a member of staff who was able to be in an environment they weren't wearing PPE was a much more natural experience. And so what we've learned is that the clinicians who have been driving that process, a lot of enthusiastic clinicians have come forward who may not have been in formal leadership positions before, have really pioneered the way that we use the equipment and technology that we have. And what I would say is that we have a best of breed approach in our hospital to many systems. So as a specialist centre, we've encouraged innovation by individual clinicians with often commercial entities. And that means that we have a lot of systems, and almost anything we wanted to do could be done by one of those systems somewhere. We've only invested in a few new ones as part of this process. But I think that where we are now is that we're now in a phase of consolidation where we try and identify the best way of doing it across our hospital and signpost people to using those. I think that's my main takeaway, and that together with the fact that we've got so many enthusiastic people who found new ways of using our systems to do it. And our innovation team's challenge is linking up with them, finding the best way to do it, and then spreading that word out further. And I think the other bit that for me is quite interesting is that I've shared I've shared out the way that we've done our governance around this, and our information governance and managed risk through this process in a slightly different way, which I think is a topic we'll tackle later in the regulatory discussion.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I think you touched upon many different aspects, which are really exciting. So also mentioning patient experience is something quite important. Also having the physicians being really eager to foster that kind of technology. So I was wondering, maybe Iga, do you agree with this kind of perspective, or did you make any different experiences?
Of course, I agree. I think we've learned so much in the past few months. And I do want to share some of that. One thing that we've done, we've had a fairly robust telemedicine program before COVID. We actually changed our primary vendor for telemedicine a couple of months before COVID. A new company that we started working with after a long process of RFP and tender and so on. We sort of accelerated the development of this new program to launch it in time to help us in COVID, and that came in right in the right time. But the other side of this is telemedicine we've used inside the hospital. Obviously telemedicine outside is one thing, and that's what telemedicine was designed for. But for the first time ever, I think, we're seeing a large scale need to have telemedicine inside the hospital where doctors are caring for patients who are sitting in the room next to them. It's not across town, it's not hundreds of kilometers away as we're sometimes doing it, but really a few meters away. And it's not just about the video connection and communication. It's also about being able to examine the patients. And we've been using technology that allows clinicians to listen to the heart, listen to the lungs, look into the ear or the throat of patients, and really perform almost a comprehensive physical examination on patients while they're sitting in a different room. And obviously when we brought that technology in and showed physicians that we want them to start using it, the first reaction was, we can never trust such a technology. I need to be, at the bedside. I need to stand next to the patient. I have to touch the patient to be able to examine him. That's how we've been taught to perform medicine for thousands of years. But because of the necessity, because it was either that, or expose yourself to a virus, which is a concept now that doctors are saying, well, let me rethink about this option. And they started using this technology and performed physical examination using technology like TytoCare and other companies that are out there. And the feedback we received was really positive. We've heard cardiologists come in and say, I could make a diagnosis just like I was examining the patient next to him with my own stethoscope. And once they got used to using that technology and they understood the value of it, it was very difficult to take it away from them. And so what I think is that what we're seeing now is an acceleration of adoption that probably would have taken us many years if it wasn't for COVID. And now when I approach those doctors, post-COVID and tell them, listen, let's use the same technology to care for patients at home, they'll be much more open to it. So this is, I think, some of the, looking at least the quarter full glass of COVID, with the huge catastrophe we've seen with this pandemic. I think that if you want to see the upside, or at least the quarter full glass, if not the half full glass, I think this is part of it. The adoption we're seeing with telehealth.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting because I also just thought about the claim of physician experience. So always we talk about patient experience, but now you mentioned a clear example of a physician experience where they saw, okay, I can do my job very well using this kind of technology. So I think we come to also talking about the different tools later on, but first I would like to give Patty also the option to bring another perspective, because you're a provider also of governmental funded healthcare in the US, so probably you can also share your view on the last couple of months.
Absolutely, and I can't agree more with the sentiments shared already, but the progression that we've seen over the last few months and adoption of telehealth has really been tremendous. And we've received the consumer experience, patient experience, as we already noted, has been really positive. And so is the provider experience. I mean, I think we were able to leverage a lot of the platforms and vendors that we already had. We are a large scale organization, so we need a number of different solutions, but we also been working really closely with our providers to meet them where they are and the technology that they need. So that's sort of beyond the telehealth vendor. And in some cases, we've been grappling with some challenges. So while it's been successful and we've had great adoption, especially in certain specialties like behavioral health, we're also, because we serve low-income, underserved individuals, access to broadband and devices has been a bit of a challenge, and also for providers to have access to that technology to be able to do the telehealth visits. So we've been really working closely in partnership with our providers, with our members, with telecommunication companies like AT&T, to really try to address. But overall, really been tremendous progress in such a short period of time. And I'll also note, which I think we can all agree on, is just how quickly policy, the regulatory environment, has caught up to this transformation, and to see the change, at least on a temporary basis with the pandemic, has been tremendous and great. And so I think the challenge ahead of us is, what does the regulatory environment look like long term? What does access to telehealth and digital tools look like long term? But I think we're excited and very, I think, proud of our efforts to date.
Yeah, I think it's a great challenge also at this scale. So yeah, you're a really great and also large corporation with so many members serving them in many different places. So I think this is where digital health was also made for, kind of. So I think that it's a really great story. And I like the term, I think Rishi mentioned at the beginning, we are in a consolidation phase. So we are just entering in a phase where we learned a lot, and now we need to see how can we carry on with these learnings and also accelerate the future adoption. So I would like to touch this more in detail, because I think there are two different aspects. So first, I think Ilya mentioned also that you need a new way of using this technology. That you can also expand the possibilities using telehealth. It's more than a video call. It's also, you can use many different tools to assess more vital parameters, or also get a proper diagnosis. So this is one aspect, and I think that would be a topic I would like to put towards also here, Rishi and Ilya later on. But I think it's also a commercial question, because you already, Patty, mentioned that it's about regulation. So maybe you can give us some more ideas what you're particularly looking at. So what really needs to change or what needs to last. So maybe you can elaborate on that.
Sure. So I think what a couple different ideas come to mind. I think one is, in the US, we have federal regulations, and then the states govern a number of our other programs, such as Medicaid some private commercial health insurance as well. So I think it's making sure that the regulations provide enough flexibility to continue to use the home as the originating site. And also, I think flexibility in terms of types of technology. I think one thing we are also dealing with is just adoption and ease of using this technology. And one thing I think that we're sort of seeing is for some populations, being able to access a Zoom call like this is very daunting. And so for some of our members, we've had to sort of meet them and have the ability to call them to do things through an audio only method. And so I think the regulatory environment just sort of needs to understand sort of the progression here and then think about what makes sense in certain circumstances. And then I think reimbursement is also just something that we're all gonna need to deal with. The other thing I'll mention, and it's really a big issue here in the US, is data sharing and being able to have various systems talk to each other. So being able to take that telehealth visit, combine it with whatever the provider's patient history, and to be able to combine all of that information into one place so that the individual has access to it, that payers can and providers can best manage individuals' care. So there's a lot of regulations that they're already being finalized here in the US, and more will need to be done to look at privacy, issues of privacy, and other issues like that. So those are kind of the regulatory challenges I see ahead. But I think I'm hopeful that we'll get there and figure out what makes sense.
Okay, thanks a lot. Yeah. So maybe just one quick question to follow up on that. So when it comes to the data sharing part, do you think it's a more a technical problem, or is it really a regulatory problem? So that systems don't talk to each other, or that you have different data formats? So where do you see the issue?
I think it's both. I think there's I think that you need some requirements to make sure that data flows from, for example, electronic health records, from payers. You have to, there needs to be regulations governing that. But then I think also you really need the privacy, those privacy considerations to that, and making sure that there's the members individuals are giving clear consent to the sharing of their information. So I think that's really key. And then technology, and we'll hopefully get to this, but it's great to have all the information coming together, but that's a huge operational challenge and a technology challenge of how do you make best use of that data, how do you manage that data, and leverage it. So I think it's both a regulatory and an operational challenge, and how can digital tools actually evolve to solve and address real patient care challenges.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I'm looking at Ilya because what I know from Israel that you already mastered the data sharing challenge. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's true. I know the challenges in the US specifically. I've spent many years there working, but in Israel we have for about 4 years now, complete data sharing between all providers in the country, whether it's private or public, even the army. So all clinical data is being shared, and it did take a while to get there because they started this initiative about 10 years before, and it took about 10 years to get to full coverage in a small country like Israel. So I gather I know it's not an easy fit anywhere else in the world. And also, policy and regulations were critical, because at the end of the day, what happened in Israel was a decision that the residents that were going to share their data, they needed to opt out rather than opt in. So there was a lot of publications on the press, on newspapers, and everywhere that if you are not interested in having your data shared on the platform, you should call this number or log into this website. and then state that you're not interested. And there was about 0.2% of the population that actually did that. So we have 99.8% coverage. And I think the 0.2 have gotten around to agree to it at some point as well, because the the added value for patients is obviously considerable.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe Rishi, you can also get your perspective on that. And I would like to also ask you the question about when it comes to regulation and reimbursement. So looking at the UK, you have a single payer system. So is it easy there so that you have also more alignment, or do you also see the challenge of fragmentation?
So, I mean, we face similar problems to what Patty and Eyal both outlined there. I think we do have a single payer system, and what I have been really impressed by here is that although we've had previously one organization kind of giving us guidance on information governance and what data can be shared, with respect to my colleagues, the guidance hasn't been very clear. And in this response to COVID, I think we have had the clearest guidance I've ever had around what we are sharing information for. And that has unblocked a lot of people whose role is to reduce our risk to as low as possible, and therefore whose tendency is to say, no, don't share, and flipped it on its head and said, well, we're in a position where we're having to do things we wouldn't choose to do. Will sharing the data help us? And what risk really are we exposing ourselves to? And with that mindset shift, we've been able to move very quickly. And so thank you to my colleagues at NHS Digital, who provided much better guidance, and NHSX, who provided much clearer guidance than we've ever had before. But I think really it's about turning that on its head. And again, our clinicians have taken a real lead on that. And been saying, well, we want to share the data for this purpose, and in a much more articulate way than they have before. And we've been able to say, well, in that case, no roadblocks from our end. Let's get on with it.
So you mentioned just the NHS Digital and NHSX. Can you probably shortly describe what they are doing and how you interact with them as a hospital?
Oh, that's a really tricky question. So the NHS Digital has traditionally been the main organisation from which we get guidance on digital and information issues. I think NHSX has now taken, and it continues to support us on a lot of infrastructure parts as part of NHS England. NHSX is an offshoot, a little bit more disruptive, which is what we like in innovation, with a very exclusively patient-focused lens of saying what is going to help patients from a technology perspective. And I think that's been a really, really helpful force in what we have here, because, you know, as part of this COVID response, they went out and asked for expressions of interest of things that would be helpful to healthcare providers and patients, formed a long list, formed a short list, went through a contracting process, and gave us contracts that we could piggyback off, and some national contracts for things like video consultations, for instance. That's had a disruptive effect on the market as a whole, and we're kind of living with what some of the consequences of that are at the moment. But I think overall it has focused all the myriad of different provider organizations on what technology will help the patients and how do we deploy that quickly. And I think that's been a really welcome change.
Yeah, thanks you a lot. So I think NHSX and NHS Digital, they are really recognized organizations that you also drive this kind of innovation. And maybe I think there are also similar programs running in the US. So I think about the Digital Health Pre-Cert Pilot Program, for example, when it comes to digital therapeutics. So maybe Patty, if you would like to also touch this point again.
Sure. Yeah. So in terms of innovation, I think we're very excited about thinking about different ways that digital tools can do different things like triage, to be able to through use of AI, artificial intelligence, to do triage to sort of make sure that members can go to the right setting. I think we are very excited about that. I think the other innovation that we are is really critical to what we do, and especially in the time COVID is remote patient monitoring. So we serve a very complex, we Medicaid managed long-term services and supports is a growing population for us. So individuals who receive long-term services and supports. So being able to have use of technology to monitor and to do the care management remotely. I think we have, I think previously really relied on high touch, in-person and home assessments. And so I think being able to leverage those, the various digital tools to tackle those issues. But I think we are just, we're excited to partner with other and develop other innovative tools. And I think especially the promise of better interoperability. And I'm very, that's very exciting about Israel. And I hope that we will get there in the US and really be able to partner with our providers so that they can use the data and that we as a payer can work with them on some value-based payment arrangements to really drive patient outcomes.
Yeah, thank you. So now you had the perfect position to also go into both directions. So once the European market, but also the US market. And I think you have also a great innovation process within your institution. So you work on many different projects. And I think I read very interesting claim on your website that you have clinical champions that run single programs. So maybe you could also elaborate how you work on these new technologies and then also touching the point of reimbursement. So because this is at the end also the basis of a business model when it comes to digital healthcare. So how do you see that?
Well, yes, I could tell you many stories about, the innovation programs, specifically with healthcare. Maybe use this as an example for telehealth. We are encouraging our different services and our providers, and specifically looking to our innovation champions to come up with new models for care. I mean, it's not just about examining your patient through video. Or something that we've been all doing for a while now, but really rethinking. Once you realize that telemedicine is not a constraint, telemedicine is medicine, and it provides other opportunities for you to take and provide even better care to improve patient outcomes. And then once you realize that, and you're opening your institution to all these many different types of innovative models of providing care through telemedicine, you're opening the spectrum in a very wide perspective. So one thing that we're doing, for example, is we've devised this program called MICA, which stands for Managed Care through Care Coordination and so on. And the idea is to find patient population with chronic disease and be able, as we see them maybe twice a year in the office, be able to extend our services 365 days a week, a year, and not just for the 2 times a year that we see the patients. And we do this not through just through managed care and a care provider and a care manager, but also through wearable sensors and apps and patient engagement. And we try to build these models around the specific needs of a patient. So for example, we just launched now one for Parkinson's disease, where it's specifically tailored towards Parkinson patients, with their needs would be very different than if you do this, for example, for congestive heart failure patients. So we're building it as a unit, as an integrated practice unit, but we're putting a lot of technology into this, using telemedicine, and then following patients, providing them a home at Chiba, which is a virtual home. And we have about 14 of these programs already running, and we're launching about 2 or 3, every year. And it always starts with a pilot program. We're measuring the outcomes, and then if we're seeing the value and we see patient engagement and so on, then we launch it as a full program, and we work with the insurance companies to get reimbursement for it. So that's one example of how we use innovation, telehealth, and new provider models to work with our insurance companies here in Israel to provide better care.
Thank you. There's one question which comes to my mind because in digital technologies, you can measure a lot. So you get a lot of data. And as you mentioned, you also see the outcomes and the value. So do you think also value-based healthcare is also something which is growing due to all the transparency we also get by these technologies?
For sure. And I'll give you an example of something we're doing, which I think is very unique and we're seeing great results already from. And this is a hospital at home program for psychiatric patients, where psychiatric patients who actually need acute hospitalization, they come into the hospital. We have a psychiatric hospital here at Sheba, and they spend one day where we evaluate them and we make sure that they fit a hospital at home environment. Then they go on to complete their hospitalization, which typically would be around 2 to 3 weeks at home, and they're then discharged from home. But we continue to follow them up for a year post-discharge because we're getting paid bundled payments, taking a risk for a full year post-hospitalization. So if the patient comes back to the hospital within that 1 year, we don't get paid for it because we obviously will lose money and we're taking the risk. So a program that runs a bundle payments that runs all the way to a year, requires you to rethink responsibility and accountability and really be able to manage those patients 1 year post discharge using the technology, obviously, to make sure we're seeing these patients stay out of the hospital. So for a hospital to take that perspective, that's obviously where we all need to go, and it's very much aligned with value-based healthcare.
Yeah, thank you. So I see Patty nodding your head. So maybe you want to comment that directly.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Value-based care is really at the cornerstone of where we are and the partnerships that we're building with our providers. So we are working with our providers to sort of make sure that we're working towards outcomes, that we're reducing readmissions, that we're meeting certain measures, and also, working towards capitation, working with at-risk models such as what you mentioned, Ayel. So it's really, really exciting. And I think that's just something that with the increased access to data, we'll just be able to make those value-based care arrangements that much stronger, and that ability to look longer term and look at really health outcomes is really critical. So yeah, it's absolutely critical part of what we're doing as a payer, and just so yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting topic because I think when it comes to value-based healthcare, also in the UK, Rishi, you have some experience, but also now we have these new technologies which enable just to get a more precise measuring. So maybe you can also comment.
Yeah, sure. I think the measurement devices are really helpful. I think one thing that we have perhaps been a little bit behind other geographies on is capturing patient-reported outcomes and patient surveys as part of that data. And we've just put in a patient portal as a mechanism of trying to get all of that into one place. It's really important from our end, but I think one of the other bits that a patient portal or other third parties can really add value is that the devices that patients will be using are pretty varied. And whereas it would be lovely if we adopt, one connected spirometer across our entire hospital, the reality is that patients from all over the country and internationally will be using different devices. And having a mechanism to standardize what the outcomes of those are prior to us ingesting them and comparing that data is really, really helpful, I think. And I've seen a few people moving in that space, which again will help us towards value-based healthcare, I think.
Okay, I just read that you are also a founder yourself. So you're also developing software, is that correct?
I am, although it's not connected with this particular bit, but it will hopefully help people staying at home as Eyal was commenting. But I think it's quite an interesting environment because as Patty was saying, in England, we found that we've moved very rapidly from a payment by activity reimbursement model pretty much overnight in this COVID response to a block payment or a capitated payment model in an awful lot of areas. And that's just accelerated what we can do as part of our pathway and care redesign program. And I would echo everything Eyal said earlier about the way that that works. You know, the speed which we can go is really good now.
So maybe you can also share some ideas of how you have set up your innovation team and how do you work in your unit? Because we touched upon so many different technologies and products which are already there. So the question is also, do we still expect new technologies to come? So where do you see the potential and how do you grow new ideas?
Sure. Well, in order to accelerate this whole process, I think what we have done is we've taken our innovation team and we've focused them on 3 specific areas. There's a set which are focused on rapid adoption of technologies across the whole of our hospitals. Each of the care groups are somewhat different and deal with very specialized patients, but a lot of that is about adoption, standardization of processes and helping people to use things. We've focused on a team which is looking at well-established innovations, things that are working in other hospitals, perhaps working in Israel, for example, and there's a good example, but it's never been used in the UK and we need to pilot it or use it in our services. And they're really focused on pilots and demonstrating the effectiveness. And then we have a third team, which is very much at the early stage, focused on working with companies that have an idea and perhaps not yet a marketed product or a product that needs adapting from another sector, and trying to help them to get to market using our data assets and our access to clinicians and patients in that environment. And I think those 3 challenges are actually very different. And so we're tackling them in each in a different way. And I think, you know, reflects, I think, on conversation I've had with other hospitals before, and perhaps Eyal has a comment to add on it. But what I would say is that the value of networks in doing this is really huge. And I was asked recently, you know, how many in a hospital my size with maybe 5,000 staff, it's not huge, how many programs could I run through a pilot in a year? And if each pilot's sort of 3 months, it's hard to run more than 10 or 12. So actually choosing things and being very clear what the priorities are and how to go through that are really important. And then accessing networks through accelerators or through networks of hospitals has been the way that we've searched for early stage companies that can help us. And so I think that's the other valuable part of this ecosystem that it's worth talking about.
Yeah, that's a really nice perspective. So maybe, Eyal, if you do you agree with this perspectives, or how do you also still search for new technologies? So a startup I really like from Israel is Healthy.io. So I think they are creating really great stuff. Also, I think the home testing part is still in an early phase. But what can we expect from your side? So what kind of technologies are you interested in, and how do you scout for them?
So the ARC strategy, basically, I've mentioned ARC at the beginning. The ARC strategy is about proactively changing the future, having a vision, a clear vision of how healthcare needs to look like, and then working proactively to get there rather than be opportunistic and wait for innovations to drop in your laps, which is unfortunately how many of us work at the end. And proactively doing this means that you know specifically what you're looking for, and you're looking outside to see if there's a startup company. You know, in Israel we have many of those. So obviously we look around first, but then we go to our many partners around the world to see if they know of anything. And if we don't find something like this, we actually design it. We have a huge internal innovation program here that we fund and can actually build these solutions and then launch a startup company, which would be a spin out of Sheba Medical Center. And we have about 40 spin out companies right now in the market with those solutions that were erected in the last 3 or 4 years. So the way to do this is actually know exactly what you're looking for first. It's not easy. It sounds easy, but it's not. Many times we don't know what we're looking for. until somebody again comes to us with an idea and we think, wow, that's a great idea. But that's where the vision has to be clear, and you have to work and reinforce that vision of how healthcare needs to look like, and having patients in the center and focusing on outcomes, and all of those principles that we're citing, of course, are in the heart of this. And then a global ecosystem, Rishi alluded to that. A global ecosystem allows you to work together with partners around the world who share a common vision, because that has to be at the center again. And find those technologies and then bring it and then test them out together. We have some proof of concept pilots that we're running in parallel in 4 different countries. We have a hospital at home program that we're running in Israel, in the US, Canada, and Denmark through our collaborator institutions in those 4 countries, part of the ARC network. So this is the way we see this. And I think, again, the global ecosystem can play a critical role here. I think we're much more similar than we are different in many of the challenges we're facing, and I think thinking about this in a global perspective carries a lot of advantage rather than just looking at it locally.
That's really interesting, because still a patient is a patient. It doesn't matter where exactly they are. And do you also believe that digital health is really a global market, so that one single company or only a few companies can really serve the whole world? Or do you still think there will be local heroes going over the market?
Well, we'll see both. But I think, again, COVID has taught us that, especially in these times of crisis, we're running to the best suitable solution, even if it comes from another country. Some of the technologies we've used during COVID and then we've shared with our partner organizations around the world were taken by these partner organizations really quickly, because again, there wasn't a lot of time to make decisions and get new technology on board. And we've seen technology like Title Care and Datos and Early Sense and other technology we've really incorporated into our solutions for COVID really expand very, very quickly. Of course, this is not normal times, as we're all noticing. But I think it's a microcosmos and an example of what can and needs to happen on the larger scale as we move forward.
Yeah, so maybe Patty, on your website, I recognize always the claim of local partnerships, which are also one of your key success factors. So how is your perspective on the question of is digital health a global market, or do you still believe that it will be local partnerships within certain areas which really bring value for patients?
I think it's both. I think that I agree with my fellow panelists that there's a global ecosystem where we're going to see some synergies and some similarities in the way that that health data is used and presented, and so I think you're going to see that market develop. But the local partnership is really critical for us, because while we do work closely with various vendors and telehealth vendors, we value that partnership with our providers at a local level. So we need to work with them on the ground, work with our state partners, and figure out what it is they need in their regulatory environment. And so maybe that we'll have to see what solutions make sense across the board, because as we're in 50 states and different areas and a lot of rural areas where access to technology devices and broadband is challenging. So we'll have to see. But I think ultimately, it's going to be the digital health companies that do the best are the ones that can really harness the data and engage. The key I think you mentioned this, Rishi, is the member engagement and getting them excited and plugged in with their health information, and getting them engaged with their providers. And so that's really a key to all of this too. So how can these technology tools really help individuals and empower them and managing their health better?
Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing these opinions. I think it's very interesting to also see how the market is developing, and to also kind of sum up the discussions we had right now is that all of you made a really interesting experience during the last couple of months where digital health tools were really massively accelerated, both by patients and physicians. So that we now kind of jumped over a certain hurdle, and now it's the question of consolidation. I think it was Rishi introducing this claim for today, and I really like it now that we have to maintain this and also see where do we go next. So that is not over now and we just keep having video conferences, but we want to be ambitious and also look for the next future actually. So this is also how I would like to close this panel by asking you a last question. For example, who is the key player to watch for you for this kind of future? So what kind of company or organizations do you see in a strong position really being a game changer again? So this question first goes to Rishi.
Well, there's so many companies out there and it's hard to pick out one, but I think I'll pick out one as an example of types of companies, if I may. I think that we've worked with a company called Nouveau Air, and what I've been really impressed by is they have a really good connected spirometer, but then there are other connected spirometers out there. What they've been really good at working with us on is trying to come up with something that adapts to our workflow and our patients' needs, and therefore is a better product for those patients. And I think that element of being able to take something quite standard and tailor it to the needs of individual providers and hospitals is a real differentiator in the market from my perspective. And so I think that kind of also speaks to this global versus local bit. The idea that there's a single product that's perfect out there for every hospital in the world and every patient group, I think is probably not realistic. And I think people who tailor their products to individual providers and geographies are really, provide a better service to hospitals like us.
Okay, thank you. So I'm excited. Egil, how do you think about the player to watch?
So I think as we move towards caring for patients at their own homes, we're going to see many technologies, IoTs and sensors and wearables and so on, that we're going to collect information from. So we're going to need an integrator. We're going to need a technology that integrates all of that, brings it to the caregiver team, and makes sense of the data and presents it both to the caregiver giving team and also to the patient. And I think this is a new type of technology we're going to be seeing. It's sort of an electronic medical record in some aspects, but now integrating everything we're going to find at home into one platform. And then, Rishi was saying, the technology could be different. You might have a spirometer from, one vendor versus another vendor, but at the end of the day, they're going to have to hook up to one integrator. And those integrators are going to play a critical role. The one we're using is a company called Datos, an Israeli company that is now expanding fairly quickly because they've had that idea going on for a couple of years now, and they're meeting COVID in a situation where they're ready to actually go into this role of integrating the different devices and providing the full picture of a patient at home. So I think this is what we're going to be seeing a lot of in the next few years.
Okay, thank you. So closing the round now, Patty.
So it's hard to pick a particular player, but I agree that the integrator service and tool is really critical. And so I'm keeping my eye out for various third-party application developers that can really make sense again of the data, the volumes of data coming from various different streams. And so, we'll have to see if big companies like Apple will do it, given their connection to so many people's devices around the world, or if it'll be smaller companies that you see. Bewell as an example. There's some others as well. So I think I'm excited to see how technology can maybe start to partner with health systems, providers, and payers to figure out what's the right application that will really help the whole ecosystem. So I'm just excited to see how it all evolves.
Thank you a lot. So it would be so great to have the same panel in about a year again and see if these kind of predictions really came true. Thanks a lot for taking the time, being with me, also having the conversation. I think we still have a common mindset and also a common idea that still there's a lot of things to do, both on the regulatory side, but also in regard to technical innovation. There's still a lot of homework to do, and also to just stay curious and see where we can really go to improve both patients' and physicians' experience. Thank you a lot for taking the time.